Um, I remember my Nana telling me that when we landed a man on the moon, it was like a collective expansion of what was possible for humanity. And I sometimes wonder about the conversations I'm going to have with my grandchildren about what our generation has done to prove just what's possible if you're sufficiently brave. And my fear is that they're going to look back and feel that this generation collectively shrank from the challenges of our time. I feel like we're facing more and more important challenges than ever before, and that the old systems and the old answers suddenly feel inadequate. Now, I came to this space of working on social problems through the lens of international development. I was a recent finance graduate, burgeoning banker career, and discontent with all things that was. I quit my job, and in a self-indulgent burst, I went and traveled for a while to think about what I really wanted to do with my life and what my contribution could be. I came back, re-energized and reinvigorated, and started an organization called Global Agents for Change with some friends. And we were ostensibly working on sustainable solutions to global poverty. I think we did some good work. We raised a bunch of money. We supported what I think were some pretty thoughtful projects. We received a bunch of recognition. But the nagging problem was inherent in this definition: to develop of a poor country to become more economically and socially advanced. And implicit in this is an assumption that we, and I'm talking about the West, loosely North America, Western Europe, think that we have the answers, that we can fix it. If we can just export our solutions and our answers fast enough and wide enough, everything will be okay. And as much as I've become extremely uncomfortable with that worldview and that lens, I wonder if we didn't come upon it somewhat honestly. You know, I've been very lucky to grow up in the West, a place where out on average we live longer and we're wealthier and we have fairly stable and peaceful democracies and all that comes with that. I just wonder if we've become a little too comfortable with thinking that we've already got all the answers. Now, as the saying goes, success and comfort breeds complacency. And complacency breeds failure. And this is a warning that's been passed down through the annals of time. You know, whether it's the failure of empire or a successful executive is outflanked by their juniors, or a government that's been in power too long and gets knocked out by a movement they didn't see coming. If you take your eye off the future, if you stop asking really tough questions about where we're trying to get, you'll eventually be shunted aside. And my impression is that we're coasting. Now, it's not that we've stopped innovating at all. I just bought the fancy new phone. It still blows my mind every time I can get Wi-Fi on a plane. And I've recently been informed that we've created something called a spider goat, which is a goat that can produce spider silk in its milk. You can Google that. I just wonder when those future generations look back if they're not going to question whether these were the highest and best uses of our collective genius at a rather pivotal point in human history. I think, you know, whether we like it or not, there's a couple things happening in the world that are going to kind of force us to pull our heads out of the sand. One, those systems that we've become so dependent on are rattling and wobbling. Second, that the world's changing at a pace and in a fundamental way that I'm not sure we've entirely become aware to yet. On the systems piece, whether you're talking about our education system that was created to produce workers and managers for factories and is fundamentally failing to prepare the youth of today for the challenges they'll face, or whether you're talking about healthcare systems that are gobbling up increasingly unbearable proportions of government budgets and nobody knows what to do about it, or financial systems that seem capable of imploding at a moment's notice and nobody quite understands, and compounding all of this, governance systems that seem incapable of responding in a timely and effective way. Now, there's a couple of sources for innovations and ways that we can think about this. Or there's a couple of ways that these big changes are coming through. I mean, one on the shifting systems or the wobbly systems, or sorry, on the change of pace. Sorry, lost my spot. Sorry, on the change of pace in the world. You know, we've been conditioned by the development sector or media or whatever the rest of the influences have been to think of the developing world as a fairly bleak place, somewhere that needs our answers or our money or our solutions. And there's another side to this story. We've heard of the burgeoning economies of India or China. How many people have heard of Africa rising? Or the idea that 7 out of 10 of the fastest growing countries in the world are African. Or that 22 African countries have reached middle income status. You see, some of the smartest and most ambitious people I know are working in Africa right now. And they're not digging wells or building schools. They're launching solar companies in Tanzania. Or they're investing in amazing social entrepreneurs in Kenya. Or they're launching tech incubators in Ghana. And that's the other side of this story. Now, we're going to need to think collectively about how we readdress some of these problems. And they're happening in ways that we're not at all prepared to embrace. Whether it's that they're more interconnected because it's issues like climate or financial systems that you can't just play in our own sandbox anymore, or because the pace of change is so fast through technology or anything else that our systems just aren't capable of embracing or responding to them anymore. Now, we're going to need to figure out how to think the unthinkable, a la the theme today. And I don't want you to get the idea that I'm fundamentally pessimistic about the future of humanity. I'm very optimistic about what we're capable of and what the role we could play in that story. It's just that it pisses me off. We're settling. We put a man on the moon. We eradicated smallpox. We've got polio on the ropes. We doubled human lifespans. We created a United Nations that should get more credit than it does for creating a peaceful world. In the face of all of this, isn't it fair to question whether the current state of affairs is the best that we can do? That this is the peak of our capacity or our ability? I mean, I wake up every morning and I answer email all day and night, and I just hope that nothing calamitous happens to me or my family. Maybe I can escape for a week and go to a beach and forget the whole thing. Or the most that I can ask from my government is that they can squeeze another percentage point out of GDP, or that they can shave a percentage point off of the unemployment rate, or maybe tweak that high school curriculum. And the issue is that the world demands more, and we have more to give. Eric Ries, who's an author and entrepreneur, has an interesting quote, and he said, "Our capacity to produce has dramatically outstripped our ability to know what to build. We can build almost anything we can imagine. And it puts us at this interesting place where our future prosperity depends on the quality of our collective imaginations. So how the heck are we going to build that capacity of imagination? We can build stuff. How do we build that capacity of imagination? I don't necessarily have all the answers, but I've been fairly lucky to work in a few different sectors that are often overlooked and I think are interesting sources of inspiration. So one, I want to flash back to that so-called developing world. And yes, we're often talking about countries that have had a whole host of problems and don't necessarily have the depth or breadth or capacity to address their social issues in the way that we do. But looked at another way, what happens when you don't have legacy systems or best practices from 50 years ago that tell you how you must or cannot address an issue? Perhaps you manage to take a step back and ask some different questions and come up with some different answers. Just a few quick examples. Connectivity. When you think about connectivity, we're talking 20, 30 years ago about phones, and mostly landline phones. And the obvious answer of the day was, let's get those landlines in the ground as fast as we can and get more people hooked up. But realistically, if we look back, we're asking the wrong question. People skipped landlines. They leapfrogged our technology. They went straight to mobile. Huge chunks of the world had much deeper levels of mobile penetration than we did long before we did. And it allowed them to get way ahead of the game on interesting things like mobile education, mobile health, mobile money. Second source of innovation, or second source of inspiration, why are we still talking about coal-fired power plants and whether they're the cheapest way to fire our electrical grid? When you've got entrepreneurs from Nigeria to India who are selling solar systems in the millions to businesses and homes that allow them to take control of their own sustainable energy future? Or why, if you want to take another step back, when we talk about governance, are we so obsessed with GDP, which basically just measures our ability to produce stuff or rip it out of the ground in any given year? Could we maybe take some inspiration from places like Bhutan, who've come up with really nuanced approaches to gross national happiness? Maybe that's an interesting guide for policy. Or could we look at Bolivia, which has enshrined the rights of Mother Nature directly into the Constitution? So you have to defend Mother Earth, and you have to defend the environment, bottom line. So we're dependent on all these systems that were bequeathed on us by our grandparents, or our great-great-great-great-great-grandparents, like the university that I work within right now. And although these systems have served us well for a long time, they also hold us back in some ways. They mask our ability to recognize other opportunities for inspiration. And the second source of inspiration that I wanted to chat about, the world's #1 renewable resource. Any got guesses on what the world's #1 renewable resource is? What? People? Oh, you guys are way faster than the practice audience. Youth, young people. I'll go one up on you on young people. They're everywhere. We can produce more of them anytime. And if we're lucky, they haven't got all the baggage that we've got. They've still got that spark of creativity and that spark of innovation and inspiration that allows them to see new solutions. And in my life, in my life's work, or what I hope will be my life's work, I guess, I like to think that we need to nurture and find and support that type of creativity anywhere we can find it. So I want to tell you a couple of quick stories about some young innovators that have inspired me. Maybe. So this gentleman here is named Sanga Moses. And Sanga is an entrepreneur that we had the opportunity to work with in Uganda through an initiative called the Global Catalyst Initiative, something we created to work with emerging social entrepreneurs in East Africa. And Sanga had a good job in the banking sector, which is a tough job to get in Uganda. There's not a lot of formal employment. But he was shaken awake one day by the fact that his little sister was missing days and days and days of school every year collecting wood as a source of cooking fuel. And he just thought there's got to be a better way to do this. So he came up with this ingenious solution where they convert excess agricultural waste into a kind of biochar dust and they compress it into a briquette. And he can sell that more cheaply than the usual source of fuel. So he's saving people money. It also displaces fuel that was made from wood, so he's stopping deforestation. And all the people who are producing the biochar and distributing the new charcoal are earning income. So he's actually created livelihoods for people as well. This genius. He didn't need a heck of a lot of help from us. He was well on his way to kind of reimagining a better Uganda. A second example, next door in Kenya, this organization was started by a woman named Maria Springer. Livelihoods started from the basis of reframing the question of, what do we do with this problem of unemployed or often homeless youth in urban slum communities in and around Nairobi? How do we provide services or how do we deal with this issue? And they just flipped it and said, what could these people contribute? What could these young people contribute? And what happens if we build a solution around that? And they came up with this idea to employ these youth as distribution agents for socially beneficial products in their communities. So products like solar or health or things that make people's lives better. And who better to build a sales team than people who've grown up on those streets and have had to hustle most often every day of their lives to figure out how to make a living and already know those communities inside out. It's the beginnings of a hell of a sales team. We also done some work in education. This is a wonderful partner of ours in Uganda. They're called Educate. And their reframing of the problem or their bigger question about what they're trying to accomplish wasn't, how do we get more kids into school, which is the usual kind of education charity. They asked and said, what's school for? How do we create a generation of youth that are going to solve the problems of the future of Uganda? And their answer was to create a 2-year high school curriculum alongside grades 11 and 12. And it teaches community leadership and social entrepreneurship. And they eventually got it adopted by the Ministry of Education. And now it's taught nationwide across Uganda. Baka here is one of their graduates. They've reached thousands of youth now. And he won a big award when he came out and started something called Angels Initiatives. And Angels Initiatives, like an incubator, they support other emerging Ugandan entrepreneurs, and now they're working with dozens of future entrepreneurs. And the cycle's kind of been started. And Baka and his partner Joaquim have also started a few other businesses, and they're quickly establishing themselves as that leadership group that's gonna take Uganda forward. A last example, just to bring it home, this is Sonam and Chantel. They started a company here in Vancouver called Fusion Kitchen. And what Fusion Kitchen does is teaches cooking classes based on a bunch of different cuisines from all over the world. But the kicker is that they employ women who've recently immigrated to Canada to teach these classes based on the cuisine from where they've come from. So they're creating often the first opportunity for these women to gain work experience in Canada, to build networks outside the house, their first opportunity to earn income. And in the process, they're also just creating this wonderful cross-cultural opportunity for everybody who participates. Highly recommended if you have a chance. And Sonam and Chantel came out of a program that we built at the university here that's trying to work with young people like this and is trying to nurture that innovative capacity where and when we find it, give them opportunities to understand social problems and to build those practical solutions and get some practice so that they can come out and find those fundamental reimagined answers that we're going to need if we're going to think the unthinkable. So last slide. This image is called the blue marble. It wasn't the first image taken of Earth from space, but it was one of the first where we were fully illuminated. And it was taken by Apollo 17 on December 7th, 1972. And it was seized on by the environmental movement of the 70s as indicative of our kind of shared fate on this small blue planet. And I just thought it was a nice reminder that we're in all of this together. And the time when we could put our heads down and as communities or as individuals or as nations and hope the world's problems were going to pass us by is over. More is asked of us. And we have a lot more to give. It's not a question of capacity, it's a question of will. So I flash back to that conversation with my Nana, and she passed away recently at the wise old age of 101. And that conversation about how we've already shaken the world's understanding once when we put that man on the moon. We shook everybody's understanding about what was possible. And it's time to shake that understanding again. But maybe the questions aren't out there this time. They're here. They're about how we work together on these shared and pressing challenges. So when you think back to that question, what are you going to tell your grandchildren that this generation did? What did we do to prove what's possible when you're sufficiently brave? And maybe most importantly for you in the room, what did you do? What was your role in this kind of shared collective journey of ours? So I'll leave you with that question. Thank you.